All right, strap in, everyone. We're going deep into the ancient Near East today.
Deep dive time.
You want to explore the culture of this whole region, especially when the Egyptian Empire was on the rise, right?
Exactly, yeah.
Well, we've got these excerpts from History of Egypt 04 maspalaf.pdf. They're like our treasure map.
Oh, those are great sources.
Seriously, it's wild. Like suddenly you're seeing the landscape, the cities, people going about their lives, even their gods.
It really paints a picture, doesn't it? Though it's worth remembering, we are looking at this through Egyptian eyes, their record.
Oh, totally. It's like reading someone's travel blog from, 3,000 years ago. You get their takes, but you always wonder what the locals thought.
Oh, right. Always multiple sides to every story.
Okay, so first things first, the geography. This region wasn't a walk in the park. Imagine towering mountains, Lebanon, anti-Lebanon, some peaks over 10,000 feet high.
Wow.
And then you've got the Orontes River winding through it all. They called it the rebel, wild, unpredictable.
Makes sense given how vital those geographic features were. Mountains, natural fortresses, and the Orontes River, even if it was a bit temperamental, essential for trade, agriculture, the whole shebang.
Yeah, like how the Nile shaped Egypt.
Right,
Yeah.
absolutely. Same idea.
So the excerpts mention how people had to work for their water here. Wells, cisterns, canals, way more effort than along the Nile.
A lot more effort, yeah.
There's even talk about deforestation, like they were changing the entire landscape just to survive.
Really makes you think about sustainability, doesn't it?
Yeah, did they change too much, too fast? Big question. Okay, so we've got the stage set. Now, who are the actors in this ancient drama? The sources mention all these diverse groups, but it's not easy to figure out their relationships.
Especially through just the Egyptian records, right?
Exactly, it's all from their perspective. So they've got these labels, Amu for the folks from Asia, Manasi for the desert dwellers, Shaosu for pillagers.
Shaosu. That sounds rough.
Right. But what did those terms even mean to the people themselves? Who knows?
Classic history is written by the victor's problem. Makes you crave those missing perspectives.
Absolutely. And speaking of missing pieces, let's talk about the Hyksos, the shepherd kings who ruled Egypt for a while. Nobody's sure where they came from.
Big mystery. Were they invaders, migrants?
The sources throw out all these possibilities: Canaanites, Elamites, maybe even Hittites or Scythians from way out east.
It's still a big debate, but one thing's for sure. Their rule left a mark on Egypt politically, culturally.
Yeah, you were really interested in the cultural exchange, and the Hyksos are a prime example. How much was forced? How much was just people adapting?
Tough to say. Yeah, we only have one side of the story here. Makes you wonder what a Hyksos deep dive would reveal, huh? Their own gods, stories, ways of life.
Totally different perspective. Okay, so we've got the land, the people. What about the cities? The sources mention some big names, starting with Babylon. The sheer grandeur jumps out at you. The Temple of Bel, those legendary hanging gardens, the mighty Euphrates River.
Though I bet living with that river wasn't always easy.
No kidding. Just like the Orontes, the Euphrates was a double-edged sword, fertile land, but also those floods that could wipe out everything. It's amazing how those ancient cities were both shaped by and constantly battling their environment.
Yeah, they were playing a high-stakes game.
For sure. Then you've got Susa, a powerhouse city for the Elamites, their own unique culture, religion. I can only imagine what their gods were like. Probably wild compared to the Egyptian ones.
And remember, the Egyptians weren't just sightseeing. They wanted to expand their empire. And pushing into this region wasn't easy. Campaigns like Thutmosis, going into Nubia and Syria, they met some serious resistance.
Right. Trying to control an empire that huge, relying on troops from all over, needing new technology all the time. Stressful.
Definitely stressful.
It's clear this wasn't just about military power, but about totally different cultures, ways of life, clashing.
Culture clash, absolutely.
Yeah.
Imagine meeting people with completely different clothes, customs, beliefs.
It's total culture shock. All right, so let's talk about this clash of the gods. The Syrian pantheon, according to these sources, was a world away from what the Egyptians were used to.
Oh, yeah, totally different. Right off the bat, you've got Elwin, the top god, and his counterpart, El-Elat, already different dynamic.
And then there's some really interesting ones. Reshef, a storm god, all about lightning and got to be popular in a region prone to sudden storms.
Right.
Then there's Hadad, another weather god bringing the rain. And Dagon, a fertility god, but also a fish god. That's a new one.
Don't forget Astarte, a goddess of love, fertility, and war. What a combo.
Talk about multi-talented. It seems like those Syrian gods had a lot more flexibility than the Egyptian ones, whose roles were more defined.
Yeah, definitely more fluid.
What really struck me was how their worship was tied to nature, high places, sacred trees, stones. It's like they saw the divine woven into the landscape, way different from the grand temples of Egypt.
That connection to nature makes sense when you consider how vital the land was to their survival. The Egyptians, with their predictable Nile, had a different relationship with nature, I guess.
Totally. And speaking of being tied to a specific element, we got to talk about the Phoenicians, those master seafarers, all about trade and shipbuilding. The Egyptians, being landlocked, must have been both impressed and a little intimidated by them.
The sources mention their main cities, Tyre, Sidon, Byblos, Arvad, each one with its own thing going on.
Right.
But they were all about the sea. Their entire culture was built around it.
Their trade goods alone were legendary. Purple dye, imagine how valuable that was back then. Glassware, finely made weapons. They must have been racking up those ancient mariner miles, sailing all over the Mediterranean.
They were the ancient world's best sailors, that's for sure.
It makes you wonder what stories they brought back from those voyages. Tales of far-off lands and strange customs.
Oh, absolutely. And it reminds us that the ancient world wasn't as isolated as we might think. Cultures were bumping into each other, trading stuff, sharing ideas. Yeah. Maybe even some religious practices.
Okay, so we've got the land, the people, the cities, a glimpse into their beliefs. But before we move on, I gotta ask, how did these folks view death and the afterlife? Especially compared to the Egyptians, who were kind of obsessed with it.
Well, that's where things get really interesting. Remember those elaborate Egyptian tombs, all about preserving the body for eternity, mummies and all that?
Yeah.
Well, the Syrians and Phoenicians, they took a totally different approach. The Syrians and Phoenicians weren't so focused on fancy tombs or preserving bodies. The sources mention them using natural caves, rock-cut tombs, even simpler burial practices. It's almost like they were less concerned with the physical body and more about the soul's journey or something like that.
Huh. Yeah, that's a big difference from that whole mummy for eternity thing the Egyptians had going on. Makes you wonder if their whole idea of the afterlife was different too. Maybe they saw it as a clean break, leaving the material world behind.
Right. That's what's so cool about studying different cultures side by side. It challenges those assumptions, you know. Speaking of assumptions, remember how we talked about the Hyksos and how the Egyptians viewed them? Well, even their name, Hyksos, has a couple of different interpretations.
Wait, really? I always thought Shepherd Kings was the straightforward translation.
Yeah, that's the common one, based on an Egyptian historian writing much later. But some scholars think Hyksos actually comes from Hekakasut, meaning ruler of foreign lands. Subtle difference, but it changes the whole vibe.
Totally. Suddenly they sound less like invaders and more like, well, rulers. Maybe even legitimate rulers, from some people's point of view.
Exactly. It shows how even a name can be spun. Makes you wonder what other stories we're missing.
Nah, for sure. Speaking of stories, let's go back to Babylon for a minute. We talked about the Temple of Bel, the Hanging Gardens, but what really stood out to me was the city's layout. Split in two by the Euphrates River, connected by canals and bridges, talk about organized.
Right. And it wasn't just practical. It reflected their beliefs, too.
Yeah.
That massive ziggurat dedicated to Marduk, their main god Rain. It was like a giant staircase to heaven, dominating the skyline. A constant reminder of that divine order they believed in.
So it wasn't just function, it was a statement like, hey, look at us, we're connected to the cosmos.
Exactly. And every city had its own personality. Susa, for example, known for its elaborate palaces and that prime location on the trade routes. It was on the eastern edge of Mesopotamia, like a crossroads for goods flowing between the Iranian plateau and the Mesopotamian lowlands.
I can just picture those camel caravans loaded with silks and spices, all that haggling in different languages. A real melting pot.
And speaking of melting pots, we can't forget the Phoenicians and their legendary trade network. They were like floating marketplaces, their ships packed with everything, purple dye, glassware, those finely crafted weapons.
Seriously, how did they pull that off? Sailing all over the Mediterranean, those long-distance routes. They must have been fearless, not to mention expert navigators.
Fearless, for sure. The sources mention how they used the stars, the North Star, as their guide. Talk about pioneers. And their shipbuilding off the charts. Those ships had to be tough to handle those Mediterranean storms, you know?
Yeah, they were the ancient world's best sailors, no doubt. It makes you wonder what kind of stories those sailors brought back from their voyages. Tales of far-off lands, strange customs.
Totally sparks the imagination. And it reminds us that the ancient world wasn't as isolated as we might think. These cultures were mixing it up, trading goods and ideas, maybe even sharing some religious practices.
Right, and speaking of religious practices, we talked about the Syrian pantheon, but what did they actually do? You know, how did they worship?
Well, the sources mention these high places, special spots, usually on hills or mountains, where they'd build altars and make offerings to their gods. It's like they were trying to get closer to the heavens, literally.
A spiritual workout, huh?
Haha, yeah, something like that. And they also had these sacred trees and stones that were part of their rituals. These natural elements were seen as like embodiments of the divine, a direct link to the gods. Shows how connected they were to the natural world.
That's beautiful, actually. It makes you think about how different cultures approach that whole idea of the divine. Some try to escape the physical world, others find the sacred within it.
Exactly. It's a fundamental question, isn't it? How do we connect to the universe, to something bigger than ourselves?
Now let's bring the Phoenicians back into the mix. What about their religious beliefs? They had some interesting deities, right? Like Melkart, their main god, associated with Tyre.
Oh yeah, Melkart was a big deal. Often depicted as a warrior god, protector of sailors. You could say he was like their Poseidon.
And then there was Astarte, who seemed pretty fascinating and maybe a little intimidating.
Oh, Astarte is definitely complex. Love, fertility, but also war, all wrapped up in one goddess. Seems contradictory, but maybe it just shows how multifaceted the divine feminine was in their belief system. She was a fierce protector, and her worship was everywhere in the Phoenician world.
It's interesting how many ancient goddesses have that duality, the nurturing and the destructive. It's like a reflection of nature itself, the power to create and destroy.
Yeah, it's a powerful concept. And it definitely sets them apart from the male deities in a lot of pantheons, who often have these more rigidly defined roles. Another Phoenician god worth mentioning is Dagon, often shown as a fish god.
Yeah, I remember reading he was linked to fertility and agriculture, which seems a little odd for a fish god, right?
Maybe at first glance, but remember, the sea was everything to the Phoenicians, their livelihood, their source of food, their highway for trade. So it makes sense that Dagon's influence would extend to the land's fertility as well. It's all connected.
It's about understanding the interconnectedness of it all, right? Like how the Egyptians saw the Nile as the source of life, the Phoenicians saw the sea in the same way.
Exactly. These ancient cultures had this deep appreciation for the interconnectedness of nature, and their beliefs mirrored that. Now, since we're talking about the Phoenicians, let's touch on their preference for building cities right on the coast. The sources highlight how this gave them that edge in trade and naval warfare.
Makes sense, but wasn't it risky too? Always vulnerable to attack.
Oh, definitely. The sources describe their cities as heavily fortified, massive walls and towers. And of course, they relied on those powerful navies to defend their coastlines and protect their trade routes.
A constant balancing act. The benefits of the coast, but always on guard.
It was a calculated risk, but it paid off. Their mastery of the sea helped them build that huge trading empire, spread their influence all over the Mediterranean. And their legacy, their alphabet, shipbuilding techniques, it's still shaping our world today. Pretty amazing, considering they were always on edge.
Okay, so we've explored this incredibly complex world of cultures and beliefs in the ancient Near East, how geography shaped them, how they interacted, their different religious beliefs. But what about burial practices? The sources point out some interesting differences between the Egyptians and their neighbors in the Levant.
Right. This is where we really see those contrasting ideas about the afterlife. Remember those elaborate Egyptian tombs packed with treasures and mummified bodies? They were all about preserving the physical form for eternity.
It's like they were trying to cheat death, hold on to the material world as long as they could.
Haha, yeah, in a way. But the Syrians and Phoenicians, their approach was totally different. They weren't focused on fancy tombs or preserving bodies.
Yeah, the sources mention natural caves, rock-cut tombs, and simpler burial practices, much more low-key.
Exactly. And their tombs were often much simpler, not filled with as much stuff as the Egyptian ones. It's almost like they were less concerned with the physical remains and more focused on, I don't know, the soul's journey or something like that.
Huh. Yeah, that's a big difference from that whole mummy for eternity thing the Egyptians had going on. Makes you wonder if their whole idea of the afterlife was different too. Maybe they saw it as a clean break, leaving the material world behind.
Right. That's what's so cool about studying different cultures side by side. It challenges those assumptions, Speaking of assumptions, remember how we talked about the Hyksos and how the Egyptians viewed them? Well, even their name, Hyksos, has a couple of different interpretations.
Wait, really? I always thought Shepherd Kings was the straightforward translation.
Yeah, that's the common one, based on an Egyptian historian writing much later. But some scholars think Hyksos actually comes from Hekakasut, meaning ruler of foreign lands. Subtle difference, but it changes the whole vibe.
Totally. Suddenly they sound less like invaders and more like, well, rulers. Maybe even legitimate rulers, from some people's point of view.
Exactly. It shows how even a name can be spun. Makes you wonder what other stories were missing.
Yeah, absolutely. Speaking of stories, let's shift gears a bit and talk about a pharaoh who left a pretty big mark on the ancient world. Thutmose III. This guy was a conqueror, right? The sources paint him as this brilliant military strategist, leading campaigns everywhere from the deserts of Nubia to the plains of Syria.
Oh yeah, he was a force to be reckoned with. His reign was like the peak of Egyptian power, pushing their boundaries further than ever before. They even mentioned him crossing the Euphrates River, venturing into totally uncharted territory for the Egyptians.
Wow, that's wild. Can you imagine the logistics of supplying an army that far from home?
It must have been a constant struggle. The sources talk about the challenges they faced: mountains, securing supplies in hostile territory. They need a whole network of roads, forts, supply lines just to keep things moving.
Talk about a high-stakes game, right? It really makes you appreciate the complexity of those military operations.
And it highlights that their success wasn't just about brute force. It took meticulous planning, adapting to unexpected situations, and a whole lot of ingenuity.
Thutmose III wasn't just a warrior, though, right? He also seems to have had a head for administration. The sources mention how he reorganized those conquered territories, setting up new provinces, appointing officials.
Yeah, he understood that holding on to an empire wasn't just about conquering. It was about managing, maintaining control. It's a theme throughout history, isn't it? Empires rise through military might, but lasting power depends on good governance.
It's like building a giant Lego structure. Conquering is just the first step. Then you got to figure out how to keep the whole thing from falling apart.
Exactly. And toward the end of his reign, the sources mention a growing interest in trade and exploration. It's like he was looking beyond conquest, toward other ways to strengthen Egypt's position.
Right. The sources highlight his fascination with this land called Punt, somewhere along the Red Sea coast. A place full of exotic goods, incense, ebony, gold, ivory.
Punt was a source of luxury and wealth, and Thutmose III sent a massive expedition there, led by his trusted official, Nessie. The sources even go into detail about the voyage, the challenges of navigating the Red Sea, the diplomacy involved in trading with the Puntites.
Sounds like an adventure novel. I can picture those ships laden with treasures from Punt, sailing back to Egypt.
It was a major achievement, for sure.
Oh,
A diplomatic and commercial triumph, solidifying ties between Egypt and this distant land.
what do you think was driving Thutmose III to invest so much in trade and exploration? Was it just about the riches?
He was a smart ruler. He definitely wanted those exotic goods, but I think he also understood the importance of diversifying Egypt's economy, expanding their influence beyond their traditional borders.
So it was more than just grabbing wealth. It was about strategic power plays, securing Egypt's place on the world stage.
Exactly. And those investments in trade and exploration set the stage for a period of incredible prosperity and cultural exchange for Egypt.
Speaking of cultural exchange, let's circle back to the Phoenicians and their unique contributions. The sources specifically mention their development of that simplified alphabet, the one that got adopted and adapted by so many other cultures, including the Greeks.
Oh, the Phoenician alphabet was a game changer. So much easier to learn and use than those complex writing systems of other civilizations like the Egyptian hieroglyphs or the cuneiform from Mesopotamia.
It's crazy how something that seems so basic could have such a huge impact on history.
Right. It shows the power of ideas, how they can spread and literally change the way people communicate, record knowledge.
And it's a good reminder that even ancient cultures can leave a legacy that shapes our world today.
For sure. Their alphabet is a testament to their ingenuity, their impact on civilization. Now, let's zoom in on one of their most famous cities, Tyre. The sources describe it as this bustling hub of trade, with ships from all over the Mediterranean crowding its harbor.
Sounds like the ancient world's version of New York City or London, a real cosmopolitan center full of different cultures and languages.
Tyre was a hotbed of commerce and innovation. Those skilled artisans crafting everything from that luxurious purple dye to delicate glassware, finely wrought metalwork, intricate jewelry.
And they were known for their shipbuilding too, right? The best of the best.
Oh, yeah. The sources describe their ships as large, sturdy, capable of hauling heavy cargoes across the often rough Mediterranean, and expert navigators, too, using the stars to guide them across the open ocean.
It's amazing to think about the voyages they undertook, the risks they faced, and the connections they forged between all those distant lands. They were the ultimate networkers.
It speaks to their courage, their ingenuity, their endless curiosity. And those voyages led them to establish colonies and trading posts all over the Mediterranean, spreading their culture and influence far and wide.
It really challenges that image we sometimes have of the ancient world as static and isolated, doesn't it? These cultures were constantly interacting, exchanging ideas, goods, even people.
And those interactions had a ripple effect, leading to new technologies, religious ideas, artistic styles. It's a fascinating web of interconnectedness.
Okay, so we've explored the Phoenicians' achievements on the sea and their impact on the ancient world. But let's switch gears again for a moment and dive into the religious landscape of the ancient Near East.
Yeah, let's do that. The sources highlight this incredible diversity of religious beliefs and practices in the region, a mix of indigenous traditions and influences from neighboring cultures.
It seems like there was a lot of fluidity between different pantheons and deities, almost like a mix and match approach to religion.
Exactly. The lines between different religious systems were blurry, with gods and goddesses being adopted and adapted from one culture to another. This syncretism is evident in their art, literature, and religious practices.
The sources also mention the importance of fertility cults and rituals, which seem to have been widespread throughout the region.
Yeah, fertility was a central concern for ancient societies, essential for their survival and prosperity. They believed the gods and goddesses controlled those forces of nature, including the cycles of life and death. And they performed these elaborate rituals to appease those deities, ensure the fertility of their crops, their livestock, and themselves.
It's fascinating how those ancient beliefs about fertility, the cycles of nature, still resonate with us today, even in our modern world.
It speaks to the enduring power of those primal human concerns. Now let's turn our attention back to Egypt and their unique fascination with death and the afterlife.
Oh yeah, the Egyptians really went all in on that. The sources describe those elaborate burial practices, the massive pyramids and tombs, the whole mummification process.
They believed death wasn't the end, but a transition to another realm. And they went to incredible lengths to prepare for that journey, filling their tombs with provisions, furniture, even servants to accompany them into the afterlife.
It's hard to grasp the sheer scale and complexity of their funerary rituals.
It reflects their belief in the importance of preserving the body and soul for eternity, right? Yeah. And it gives us a ton of insight into their religious beliefs, social structures, their artistic traditions.
And it highlights that enduring human fascination with death, with those mysteries beyond this life.
It's a universal question, isn't it? Cultures throughout history have tried to answer it, and the Egyptians offer one of the most elaborate and enduring attempts. Now, let's go back to the Levant and explore those rich storytelling traditions they had.
Yeah, the sources emphasize the importance of oral storytelling, those myths, legends, folk tales passed down through generations.
Storytelling was central to their culture. Entertainment, education, a way to pass on their values and beliefs. Their stories often had these religious and moral lessons woven in, giving them a framework for understanding the world and their place in it.
And it's amazing how those ancient stories can still resonate with us today, with those timeless themes of love, loss, betrayal, triumph.
They tap into that universal human experience, don't they? They go beyond time and cultural boundaries, and they offer a glimpse into the hearts and minds of the people who lived back then.
Now let's talk about a specific kind of story that was really popular in the ancient Near East. The epic.
Ah, yes, epics. Those long narrative poems celebrating the deeds of heroes and gods, recounting their adventures, battles, triumphs. They were often performed at festivals and gatherings, entertaining, inspiring, reinforcing those cultural values.
The sources mention the Epic of Gilgamesh, one of the oldest known works of literature. What can you tell us about it?
The Epic of Gilgamesh is a true masterpiece of ancient Mesopotamian literature. It follows Gilgamesh, the legendary king of Uruk, on his quest for immortality after the death of his dear friend Enkidu. His journey takes him to the ends of the earth, forcing him to confront the harsh realities of human mortality and the inevitability of death. The epic reflects that Mesopotamian obsession with the afterlife, their belief in that shadowy underworld ruled by the goddess Ereshkigal.
It's a powerful reminder that even back then, humans were wrestling with those big questions about life, death, the meaning of it all.
Their myths and legends are like a window into their deepest thoughts and feelings, their attempts to make sense of the world.
Now, let's shift gears a bit and talk about ancient Egyptian art and architecture. The sources describe their monumental architecture, those pyramids, the temples, those giant statues. They've captivated the world for centuries.
It's incredible, isn't it? The sheer scale and ambition of their architecture is mind-boggling.
The pyramids are probably the most iconic example. Their size, the mystery surrounding their construction, it still fascinates people today.
The pyramids served as tombs for the pharaohs, and their construction was a monumental undertaking, requiring thousands of workers and decades of labor. They were also astronomical observatories, aligned with the stars, embodying that Egyptian fascination with the cosmos.
It's mind-blowing to think about the engineering feats they accomplished, using simple tools and human labor.
They were masters of stonework and construction, and their monuments continue to inspire awe and wonder today. Now let's talk about Egyptian temples, which were equally impressive in scale and complexity.
Yeah, the sources describe them as these sacred spaces dedicated to specific gods and goddesses, like the gods' earthly residences, right?
Exactly. Temples were considered the homes of the gods, filled with intricate carvings, paintings, and statues depicting the myths and legends of the Egyptian pantheon. There were also places of ritual and ceremony where priests performed elaborate rites to appease the deities and ensure the well-being of the kingdom.
It's fascinating how their art and architecture were so intertwined with their religious beliefs.
Their monuments reflect their worldview, their values, and their understanding of the cosmos. They offer us a rich tapestry of symbols and meanings that continue to fascinate and intrigue us today. Now, let's delve into a specific aspect of Egyptian art that I find particularly captivating, their hieroglyphic writing system.
Yeah, the sources mentioned that hieroglyphs were more than just writing. They were considered works of art, too.
Hieroglyphs were a combination of pictographs, ideograms, and phonograms, used to record everything from religious texts and royal decrees to personal letters and even shopping lists. They were often carved into stone or painted onto papyrus, and they're just beautiful, all those intricate details and symbolic richness.
It's amazing how they conveyed such a range of ideas and emotions through that complex system of symbols.
It's a testament to their creativity and ingenuity, and their hieroglyphic writing has fascinated scholars and enthusiasts for centuries, offering valuable insights into their language, culture, and worldview.
Now let's talk about the role of women in ancient Egyptian society.
This is where things get interesting. The sources note that women in ancient Egypt had more rights and freedoms than women in many other ancient cultures.
Really? In what ways?
Well, for one, Egyptian women could own property, inherit wealth, even engage in business transactions. They were active in religious life, too, serving as priestesses and participating in temple rituals.
It's interesting that they even had female pharaohs like Hatshepsut who ruled Egypt for over 2 decades.
Hatshepsut was a remarkable ruler. Her reign, a testament to the power and influence women could hold in ancient Egyptian society. She commissioned ambitious building projects, expanded trade networks, even led military campaigns.
It reminds us that gender roles and expectations weren't always as rigid in the ancient world as we might think.
Exactly. It's a testament to the achievements of these incredible women who defied those norms and left their mark on history.
So we've explored the lives of women in ancient Egypt. What about the kids? What was it like to be a child back then?
The sources mention that children were cherished and well cared for. They were typically educated at home by their parents or by tutors, learning skills for their future roles in society.
It's fascinating that toys and games were a big part of their childhood, too.
Absolutely. Children in ancient Egypt played with dolls, balls, board games, even miniature versions of adult tools and weapons. These toys provided entertainment, socialization, and learning opportunities.
It's a good reminder that childhood, those joys and challenges, is a universal human experience no matter the time or place.
And those ancient Egyptian toys and games offer us a glimpse into the lives of those children, their imaginations, and their hopes for the future.
Now let's zoom out for a minute and look at the bigger picture of the ancient Near East. The sources describe a period of intense warfare and political upheaval, empires rising and falling, alliances shifting, battles raging all over.
It was a time of massive change and uncertainty, with the balance of power constantly shifting. New empires emerged, challenging the old order, and those technological advancements, like the chariot, completely transformed the battlefield.
The sources talk about the rise of the Hittite Empire, which became a major player in Anatolia, challenging the Egyptians for control of Syria.
The Hittites were a force to be reckoned with, skilled warriors, advanced weaponry, strategic alliances. Their clashes with the Egyptians were some of the most epic battles of the ancient world, with lasting consequences for the political landscape.
It's fascinating to think about the geopolitics at play, these powerful empires fighting for territory and resources.
A high-stakes game, that's for sure, with the fate of entire nations on the line. The outcomes of those conflicts shaped the course of history, influenced the development of cultures, languages, religions for centuries to come.
Now let's zero in on a specific conflict that had a huge impact on the ancient Near East, the Battle of Kadesh.
Ah, yes, the Battle of Kadesh, one of the largest and most significant battles in the ancient world, pitting the forces of the Egyptian pharaoh Ramesses II against the Hittite king Muwatalli II. This clash happened in 1274 BC near the city of Kadesh in Syria, and it ended in a stalemate, with both sides claiming victory.
The sources describe the battle in vivid detail, the initial Hittite ambush of the Egyptian vanguard, the fierce chariot charges, hand-to-hand combat raging all day.
A clash of titans for sure, with thousands of warriors and chariots clashing in a brutal struggle. The outcome of that battle had huge consequences, shaping the balance of power in the Near East for decades.
It's hard to imagine the sheer scale and intensity of those ancient battles, the courage of those warriors, the impact they had on the course of history.
There were pivotal moments, shaping the destinies of empires and leaving behind a legacy that we still feel today.
Before we move on, I have to mention one more thing that caught my eye in the sources. They talk about this ancient city, Ugarit, on the coast of Syria. It was a major center for trade and cultural exchange.
Oh yeah, Ugarit was a cosmopolitan city, a real melting pot of merchants, sailors, artisans from all over the Mediterranean. It was also a center of learning and scholarship, with a rich literary tradition and a unique alphabet that has given scholars incredible insights into the languages and cultures of the ancient Near East.
The sources talk about the discovery of a massive archive of clay tablets at Ugarit, revealing tons of information about their mythology, legal systems, daily life.
The Ugarit tablets are a treasure trove, offering a window into the beliefs, practices, and concerns of the people who lived in that fascinating city. They've also helped scholars decipher other ancient languages and scripts, shedding new light on the history and culture of the ancient Near East.
It's amazing how these fragile clay tablets have survived for thousands of years, preserving the voices and stories of a lost civilization.
A testament to the power of the written word, the enduring legacy of those ancient cultures.
Now, let's shift our focus to ancient Mesopotamian society and explore the role religion played in their lives.
The sources emphasize the importance of the ziggurat, that massive stepped pyramid, as a temple and a symbol of the city's connection to the divine.
Yeah, the ziggurats were like the skyscrapers of their time, towering over everything else, like a constant reminder of the gods watching over them.
Exactly. The ziggurat dominated the Mesopotamian cityscape, a symbol of the power of the gods and the authority of the priests. It was a place of worship, sacrifice, even astronomical observation. It played a crucial role in the religious and social life of the community.
It's like their architecture mirrored their beliefs, right? That idea of a hierarchical cosmos, the gods at the top and humans striving to reach them.
Their religious beliefs were deeply intertwined with their understanding of the natural world. They saw the cosmos as this vast, complex system governed by divine forces. And the ziggurat, with its towering structure and sacred rituals, was that tangible link between the human and the divine.
It really shows how religion permeated every aspect of ancient societies, shaping their worldview, their values, their daily lives.
Absolutely. And the monumental architecture of Mesopotamia, from the ziggurats to the palaces and temples, stands as a testament to the power and influence of their religious beliefs.
Okay, so we've talked about the religious landscape of ancient Mesopotamia, the importance of the ziggurat, but I'm curious about their mythology. What kinds of stories did they tell?
Mesopotamian mythology is fascinating. Creation stories, tales of good versus evil, reflections on human nature, explorations of the afterlife. Their myths feature all these gods and goddesses, each with unique personalities, powers, domains.
You mentioned the Epic of Gilgamesh earlier. It's one of the oldest works of literature we have, and it seems to offer some insight into their beliefs about death and the afterlife.
Right, Gilgamesh, the legendary king of Uruk, embarks on this quest for immortality after the death of his best friend Enkidu. His journey takes him to the ends of the earth, forcing him to confront those realities of human mortality, the inevitability of death. The epic reflects that Mesopotamian preoccupation with the afterlife and their belief in that shadowy underworld ruled by the goddess Ereshkigal.
It's a reminder that even in the ancient world, humans grappled with those big existential questions: life, death, meaning.
Exactly. Their myths and legends give us a window into their hopes, fears, and their attempts to understand the world around them.
Okay, let's change gears a bit and talk about ancient Mesopotamian medicine. It sounds like they had a pretty sophisticated system for healing, right?
They did. The sources describe specialized healers who used a variety of techniques to diagnose and treat illnesses.
What were some of those techniques?
Mesopotamian medicine was a blend of practical knowledge, religious beliefs, and magical practices. They believed illness could be caused by both natural and supernatural factors, including demons, curses, even the anger of the gods. So their healers used herbal remedies, surgical procedures, and incantations to restore balance and health.
It's interesting how their medical practices mirrored their worldview, that blend of the physical and the spiritual.
Their healers were often seen as intermediaries between the human and divine, vital for the well-being of the community.
There's also mention of divination being used in their medical practices. What was that all about?
Divination was a big deal in Mesopotamian culture. They used it for everything, diagnosing illnesses, predicting the future, interpreting the will of the gods. They'd examine the entrails of sacrificed animals, study the patterns of stars, interpret dreams and omens to gain insights into the present and the future.
It's amazing how they tried to understand the world, their place in it, through those practices.
They believed the cosmos was full of signs and symbols that could be read by those skilled in divination. Their practices reflected their belief in a world governed by both natural and supernatural forces.
Okay, so we've explored their medicine, their divination practices. But before we wrap things up, I gotta ask about their advancements in math and astronomy. They were real pioneers in those fields, right?
They were. They developed sophisticated systems that had a massive impact on the development of science and technology.
The sources mentioned they used a sexagesimal number system based on the number 60. That seems pretty complex.
It was. But those mathematical innovations laid the foundation for so many of the concepts and principles we still use today. And their astronomical observations, often tied to their religious beliefs, allowed them to develop accurate calendars, predict eclipses, even map the movements of the stars and planets.
It's mind-blowing to think about the intellectual achievements of these ancient cultures, their contributions to human knowledge, and the lasting impact they've had.
It's a reminder that the ancient world was a place of incredible creativity, innovation, and intellectual curiosity. And their achievements continue to inspire us today as we seek to understand the mysteries of the universe and push the boundaries of human knowledge.
Well, we've reached the end of our deep dive into the ancient Near East. We've covered so much: the geography, the people, their cities, their beliefs, their conflicts, their incredible achievements.
We've seen how those ancient cultures interacted with each other, adapted to their environment, shaped the course of history in ways we still feel today.
We've only scratched the surface of this vast and complex topic, but I hope this deep dive has given you a new appreciation for the rich tapestry of cultures and civilizations that thrived in the ancient Near East.
And I hope it sparked a curiosity to learn more, uncover those mysteries that remain, and discover those connections between the past and the present. After all, the ancient world is still speaking to us, if we know how to listen. It was. But those mathematical innovations laid the foundation for so many of the concepts and principles we still use in math today. And their astronomical observations, often tied to their religious beliefs, allowed them to develop accurate calendars, predict eclipses, even map the movements of the stars and planets.
It's mind-blowing to think about the intellectual achievements of these ancient cultures, their contributions to human knowledge, and the lasting impact they've had.
It's a reminder that the ancient world was a place of incredible creativity, innovation, and intellectual curiosity. And their achievements continue to inspire us today as we seek to understand the mysteries of the universe and push the boundaries of human knowledge.
Well, we've reached the end of our deep dive into the ancient Near East. We've covered so much: the geography, the people, their cities, their beliefs, their conflicts, their incredible achievements.
We've seen how those ancient cultures interacted with each other, how they adapted to their environment, and how they shaped the course of history in ways we still feel today.
It feels like we've only just scratched the surface of this vast and complex topic. I hope this deep dive has given you a new appreciation for the rich tapestry of cultures and civilizations that thrived in the ancient Near East.
And I hope it sparked your curiosity to learn more, uncover those mysteries that remain, and discover those connections between the past and the present.
Because that ancient world is still speaking to us, if we know how to listen.
Exactly.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time.